We'll do a review on Likutei Sichos in Chelek Chav Beis, volume 22. This is the second Sicha for the Parshas Tazria. The Rebbe reconciles the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe that the reason why the Negoyim, the skin rash of the tzoras, is on the outside because the person essentially is a good person. His inside is complete. It's just on the surface, he has a tzoras on the skin. But we know the Rambam, we know that tzoras comes from Lashon Hara. How could we say that it's only on the skin, it's only on the outside, because we're talking about a person who is wholesome, when we know the Pashtus tzoras comes from Lashon Hara? How could we say that he's wholesome? The Rebbe is mechadish that there's two aspects of Lashon Hara. There is one aspect of Lashon Hara where a person expresses his evil emotions, his character traits, speaking bad about somebody else. He also hurts the other person. That's a very negative expression of one's negative characteristics and tendencies to speak Lashon Hara. But then there's another aspect in Lashon Hara, just the evil tongue without any intention. The fact that it is Lashon Hara, even if you don't mean anything, eventually this leads you to other things, and therefore that's represented by the skin rash. The rash skin is specifically related to the aspect of Lashon Hara, which is not a expression of one's bad character, but it is just the Lashon Hara itself. Let's see inside and we'll go step by step. Aleph, Tazria Beis Aleph. In Oneb from Parshas Nige Odom state, in the beginning, in the section, in the portion that talks about the Nige, the plagues of the people, the Pasuk states, Odom ki yiyeh be'oir b'sorei gomer. So the Torah says Odom. The Odom, a man who on the skin of his flesh there will be a negat tzoras, there will be a leprosy, there will be a rash, a nega, a plague. Who will get the plague? It says Odom. Now, a human being has different names. Odom is considered to be the highest level. That Pasuk nuds do dem toyar Odom. The verse uses here, the description calls him Odom. Was is der Shem Hamaylo von Eden. That is the name that expresses the greatness of a Yid. It's called an Odom. And amongst the four different names, it's the highest. Und der Hechster Toyar von the vier Toyarim. And that's the highest description amongst the four describing of a person. Odom, Ish, Gever, Enish. Those are four names for a person. So Odom is the highest of the advantages, more the levels, highest level in the person. So the question is, Odom, ki yiyeh be'oir b'sorei. Why does the Torah use Odom? Is Yadua the Shaila? So it's known, the question, it's asked in many Mefarshim, Alter Rebbe Likutei Torah. Wie kommt das? How come? As b'shas mahal bader darge von Odom, when you're at the level Odom, the Torah calls you Odom. So by him zayin be'oir b'sorei eis goymer, why would there be in his skin of his flesh, there should be this leprosy of seis, etc., Negoim. If you're an Odom, why would you get Negoim? And amongst the various different kinds of impurities, the leprosy impurity is one of the most serious ones. Was Tumas Tzoras, the impurity of the Tzoras, of the leprosy, is from the Tumas Hachi Chamuris, that is from the most serious tumas, yes, to say outside, but the Yeshiv very specific applies to the Metzoira, to one who has this plague of the leprosy, of the Tzaras. Chazal zogen, and the sages even say, as Metzoira Choshuv Kimes, that a Metzoira is considered like someone who is dead. So here we're saying who gets this tzaras is the Odom. So what does the Alter Rebbe explain? Is divided the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe explains actually that's the reason. Other people, their plague is not on the skin. They have a plague in the inside. This plague on the surface, on the skin, on the outside, is because he is Odom. Is Mevair, the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe explains, as he anisenes, that is actually the reason. Because he's anisenes, that's why he gets the nega. Specifically, because we are talking about, we're dealing about such, was is in der darge von Odom, which is in the level of Odom, was is a madreget gedola shlima de kulo, which is a high step. He is the wholesome of all. The name Odom means that he has the shlemus in everything. And his high madreg is a loike b'tzaras. That's why he gets taket tzaras, because of his high madreg. That inyan hanegoyim ba'ir b'sori weist, with the idea of these plagues on this flesh, on the skin of the flesh, weist, that points as the ravos is goyim them nega, that the evil that the person has, which brings about, causes this plague. Ubemele darf sein b'dugmosi, the plague needs to be similar to the evil that causes him, is not in that pneumius from the dimension. It's not inside the inner of the person. It's not inside. The skin rash shows there's something only on his surface. The Rebbe brings that Alshich is Mevayer. The Alshich explains, as by Rishoyim was Ikron Tumo, by Rishoyim whose main they are impure, macht nit an oven arishim. Over there, a sin doesn't make a mark, bis as sein nikel by Besori, to the extent that you should be able to tell on the skin of his flesh, because valmin b'minoi einech, a kind of its own is not an interruption, meaning in the evil person you can't see something, an interruption. You can't see a skin, you can't see a rash, because he's all rash, he's all evil. So there is no point of seeing this rash. The reason why we do have the rash is when the person is wholesome. Nor as is blois, was is verblieben psoilos v'ra in sein chitzonius. It is only that there is leftover, remain leftover and evil in his externality. Besoif levusho, the Alter Rebbe's language in the end of his garments. Und derfar wer derfun anega, and that's why from that kind of ra that remained in the end of the garment, that becomes anega be'oir besoridafki, only on the skin, because this represents that the person is whole. It's only something on the outside that is plain. This also explains the Alter Rebbe why we don't have Negoyim nowadays, because most of ours is not just the skin. The Remit is the Alter Rebbe Oich Mevayir. As this with this, the Alter Rebbe also explains Varvos mitzvahs Negoyim ein enoyeg bizmanenu zeh. Why the mitzvah of the plagues does not custom in our times after the destruction. Because these are not common. As the Rambam, this is the language of the Rambam. We are ranked from Rambam as it brings the Rambam. So why is that, Takya? Why don't we have it at all? And it's exceptional. It's a Maisenisim. Is because was only talking in Rabbi Pneumius, because it's not common found by us such that should not have it on the inside, so they wouldn't get a plague of a skin rash. Because even the tzaddik and the one who's good still has some little bit of evil to contend with in the inside. Ubemela is that ra negoim ken negoim. So that ra doesn't cause negoim, that causes the inside. What causes negoim is only if there's a little bit left on the surface on the outside. But since we don't have such people, that's how come the Alter Rebbe explains why the Rambam says that nowadays we don't have the lepers, this rash, the negoim. But base, the Rebbe is going to ask it, so it's totally not understood. Here we're making this people that are getting the rash as Slimu the Kula, wholesome people, when we know that you get a rash for speaking Lashon Hara, which is actually a pretty negative and bad sin. Based, we need to understand. Chazal Zogan, our sages of blessed memory, say, as der Inyan HaNegoyim kumt als Oynish of Chet Lashon Hara. The idea of these Negoyim come as a punishment for the sin of Lashon Hara. Which is a very serious sin. Lashon Hara. To the extent that it's equal, Lashon Hara corresponds to the three most serious Averis. The Gimel Averis was Yehorik Val Yaver, in which we are commanded that we should even let ourselves get killed and not violate those Avedas. That's how serious it is. And that's what the Gemara says. Chazal tell us that Lashon Hara is equal to that. The Rambam is Meirich in Hilchos Deis, as the Rambam at length in the laws of Deis. Is Vikem and Zogan, how could we say as it is an Odom Hasholim? They were saying we're talking about a person who's complete. Sein Toyer is Odom. We describe him as Odom. Was es fällt ihm nur der Birur von Chitzonius hara. We're only lacking the external sorting out. How could we say that when we know that he's getting the tzaras for Lashon Hara, which is one of the most serious offenses? And the Tmei is not aggressive. It's surprise is even greater. The Rambam the Alter Rebbe quotes the Rambam by trying to say that there's only a minimal amount of Ra for them. And he quotes the Rambam, which talks about a whole lot at length about how bad is Lashon Hara. It means no aggressive. The Chomer for Namso per Losh Lashon Hara, the seriousness for one who speaks, relates Lashon Hara, gebracht in Rambam, is brought in the Rambam in der selber Halacha, also that same Halacha, welcher der Alter Rebbe bringt als Reihe. Alter Rebbe brings us evidence. As Negoyim seine Meise Nisim, that plagues are considered to be miraculous acts, was seinen nit Motzu Bisman that are not common nowadays. He quotes from the Rambam. In that same Halacha that the Alter Rebbe quotes, when there is dort meidig wie von Dibur Lashon Hara, and over there he says at length that how from speaking Lashon Hara, you might come, God forbid, bis zu kfir beikar, to denying Hashem, the main thing, existence of Hashem. Und das sagt der Alter Rebbe, here the Alter Rebbe is saying, As meret wegen Odom HaSholem, we're talking about a complete person. And on the other hand, Lashon Hara is bring you to denying Hashem, and that same law of the Rambam. And the Rebbe explains this by first explaining the length in the Rambam, what the Rambam is speaking about of in that halach. Gimel. But when those verstehen behagdim habiyur, we'll understand this by first introducing an explanation in Hemshech Divrei Rambam B'Halacha Anal, in the flow of the words of the Rambam in the above mentioned halacha. Nochdem wie der Rambam is mevayer as negoyim kumen al chet loshen hara. The Rambam explains that the plagues come for the sin of loshen hara. Bring them limud from Miriam, and he brings how we learned it out from Miriam that she got the leprosy for speaking loshen hara against Moshe Rabbeinu. Is a mamshech mit an inyan. He continues with a matter, with a subject was hot l'chayra nit kein shayches to loshen hara, which seems that it does not have a connection to loshen hara. Balachas kam v'kamo nit to hilchos tumas tzaras, and for sure not to the laws of the tum of tzaras. This is the language quoting what the Rambam says over there. The Rambam says, Kal v'chomer from Miriam. We learn a foretory from Miriam. Libnei Odom harishoyim hatipshim. To the human beings, the evil, foolish people, shemarbim ledaber gedolos v'niflois. They keep on blabbling, speaking big and wondrous things. They're just talking. This is the path of those who scorners, they sit, the evil scorners. They start off by speaking words of vanity. And then from this, they start talking about the shame, degradation of tzaddikim. And this brings them to getting used to speaking against the prophets, and to make doubts in the words of the prophets, to question the prophets. And then eventually this leads they come speak against Hashem, and deny in Hashem. This is the talk of the evil. That is caused to them yeshivas kronis, sitting at the corner, street corners, the yeshivas knesiyas shalame oretz, and sitting in the gathering of the ame oretz, of the lay people, the yeshivas botim ishtoyos im shoyse sheikha, and sitting in the bars, in the party houses, with people that drink beer. Avol sichas kshedi Yisrael, Rambam concludes, but the talk of the righteous, the kosher of the Yisrael, they discuss words of Torah and Chochmah. That's why Hashem helps them, and He merits them with the words that the Torah that they discuss. So this seems like a totally side point to Lashon Hara. Darf man verstehen. So we need to understand the Rebbe says. Aleph. Da redt man doch wegen dem Isur von Dibur Lashon Hara. Here we are discussing the prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara. Wach is going into Tumas Tzaras, which causes the Tum of Tzaras. Is vi pas da reinu ba'arichas. So how is it fit over here at length, just discussing here what the evil people, their discussion. In welcher hebt sich on von die Ravoi. It starts actually with just vanity words. Nicht Lashon Hara, not bad tongue. Und endigt sich mit Kfira Velikim Rachmana Litzlan, and ends with denying Hashem, God forbid. But there's no specific connection to Lashon Hara. It starts with seemingly a lot less than Lashon Hara and ends with a lot worse than Lashon Hara. And the Rebbe says further, if this was the laws of Lashon Hara, maybe you want to bring also what Lashon Hara, evil tongue, come bring sometime. But this is talking about the Tumas Tzaras. Why are we talking in Tumas Tzaras, such a lengthy explanation about the Sichas Rishoyim? I feel is also, even if you'll say, as about Lashon Hara is a prat in Sichas Rishoyim, since Lashon Hara is a detail, a specific in the evil of the speech of the evil, und der Riber, and therefore reddendig wegen Lashon Hara, und der Chomer therefore, as the Rambam was discussing Lashon Hara and the seriousness of it, darf the Rambam lechomer adover. So the Rambam, in order to show us the severity of it, explaining this in dem Genus von Sichas Rishoyim Bechlal v'chulu, the shame of the way the talk of the evil in general, hat es nicht kein Ort in Hilchos Tumas Tzaras, but that doesn't belong in the laws of Tumas Tzaras. Was is der einish blois of Lashon Hara? Tzaras comes for Lashon Hara, not for other things. The arichas belangt l'chayre, not in Hilchos Deis. This length seemingly belongs only in the laws of Deis. Vuaret protadino, it speaks the details of the din of Lashon Hara. Women darf sein obgeht von the Burim Asurim, how we should be careful, be cautioned from words that are prohibited. So why does the Rambam bring it down here? Base number 2, if the Rambam will da bring in the Mechoimere Isum Lashon Hara, if the Rambam is intention here, what he wants is to bring out how serious the prohibition of Lashon Hara. But the Kitab bringing the Lashonis Chamurim, he should have brought the very strict languages, in which he writes about one who speaks Lashon Hara in the laws of Deis. He should have brought down over there, some over there. Noch mehr. And even more, in Hilchos Deis brings the Rambam, the Maimer Chazal. In the laws of Deis, he brings the Rambam, the saying of our sages of blessed memory, one who relates Lashon Hara as if denying the main Hashem, as the hate from Lashon Hara, that the sin of Lashon Hara, mitzad atzmei, just Lashon Hara is chomur ki ilu kofer beikar, is as if you're denying the main in Hashem. So just Lashon Hara itself is not that it leads you like the Sichas of the Shoyim eventually leads you. Mashenkin does Zokter over here, he says, as fun Lashon Hara, that from Lashon Hara, kommt später, eventually they're sitting and talking, kommt später a rosh kfira beikar. Then it comes out, from this, eventually they speak against Hashem and they deny the main thing. But it doesn't say Lashon Hara alein is kilu kofer beikar, as if denying the main thing, which is denying Hashem. So if the Rambam wants to just tell us here how serious Lashon Hara is, so why doesn't he say this more serious, that this is Lashon Hara is kofer beikar? And what does the Rambam want with this whole language over here? And the Rebbe is going to go on and explain now that there is a difference, and there's 2 parts to Lashon Hara. Hilchos Deis, we talk about the evil intent and the evil character trait of speaking Lashon Hara, hurting somebody else. Here, in Tumas Tzaras, we're talking about just the drags along, just the speaking of Lashon Hara. To speak of it without intending. So we can say, what is the explanation that the Rebbe says? In this halacha that the Rambam brings down all these details, which don't seem to have anything to do with Hilchos Tumas Tzaras, and he leaves out a lot of details that he brings down in Hilchos Deis, the severity of Lashon Hara. So mit der Ariches, wegen dem Eufen von Sichos Harishoim, with the lengthy discussion about how the evil talk, kommt der Rambam Masber sein, that what the Rambam is coming here to explain, dem Geder von Lashon Hara, the definition of what Lashon Hara, welcher geht zu verstehen, which gives us an understanding for was the Titzoa from Lashon Hara is Tzaras. Why the result of Lashon Hara is Tzaras. He's explaining this whole lengthy explanation, the discussion about Sichas Harishoyim is to tell us why leprosy comes from Lashon Hara. In Lashon Hara is eine Veranzwe in Yonim. There are two aspects in Lashon Hara. Aleph das Reden Lashon Hara. One speaks Lashon Hara, welcher kommt von der Midas Reus von Medaber, which come from the bad character trait of the one speaking. Hat Kine, Besinli, has jealousy, hatred, and so on. And is going to hezek v'chulu, and he causes damage to them, women, baret, to the one who he is bad mouthing. This haste, the rike chesoren derbai is the main problem here is was ein Lashon Hara bringt aruis seine midas rois. His bad Lashon Hara brings out his bad characteristic trait. Umazig them zweiten, and it hurts the other person. Und wegen dem in Lashon Hara read the Rambam Hilchos Deis. That aspect of Lashon Hara the Rambam discusses the laws of Deis.
No, why?
Because that dort dem Teuchen von dem ganzen Perek, in which we see the contents of the entire chapter as a red als wegen the Burim van Hogis built here at Tzvim Shemodin Lachaveru. He discusses over there about all kinds of talk and conduct that are not wanted, not good conduct from a person to his friend, and Odom from a person to his friend. So that's one aspect of Lashon Hara. But Beis, Lashon Hara mitzad dem dibur atzmi, Lashon Hara because of the speech itself. Einer was redt Lashon Hara, one who speaks Lashon Hara, even not with the intention to speak Lashon Hara, is der dibur gufa schleppt im rein in der. That speech alone drags him into the evil. Although the power of speech seemingly is only an external power, it's a levush, it's a garment, and an external garment of the soul is a robber verbunden mit dem Etzem von Menschen, but it's still tied to the essence of the person. Because as the Toyer from a mention is medaber, we describe a person as speaking. So that means that's the essence. High timer. When einer redt Lashon Hara, when one speaks Lashon Hara, is der dibur bilti rotzui. That non-wanted speech, schlepp mitzad atzme on its own drags, in Marai noch merira, even more in evil. So there is the evil speech just in the speech itself, not who is speaking, what he's doing damage, not because of what he's speaking, but just Lashon Hara in itself. Hey, und das ist euch, was der Rambam bringt durch seine Arichos. This is also that the Rambam brings out through his lengthy discussion in Hilchos Tumas Tzaras wegen Sichos Harishoyim about the discussing of the evil. And Hebt on, he starts with Medar sich oisiten. He begins by starting to be careful from Hanahogos Harishoyim HaTipshim, from the conduct of the foolish evil Shamarbim Ledaber Gedolos Viniflois. They speak big, wondrous thing, exaggeration, the blubber. Was there sin? There is no content which is not desirable. There's no averas there. They're just stam hacking. Is there noch masbir? And then later on, he explains what is the path of these scorners, the way they sit, the evil. As first they start with a lot of narishkeit. They just speak wasteful words. In them dibur is nitokim bidarov kayitzba. In that speech, there is no bad character trait. Aber odi diburim, but these speech schleppen them medaber, they drag the one that's speaking bis zum Tachlis to the ultimate evil capture of the Rambam as the Rambam continues. Und das ist euch der Geder von Lashon Hara. This is also what Lashon Hara is. Sichas Harishoyim, to speak of the evil. Das Reden in an Eufun wie Rishoyim reden. Lashon Hara means talking as Sichas Harishoyim, as Rishoyim speak. The Hadgoshe, the emphasis is if them was is nit nizar. The emphasis that you're not careful, which is poigim b'chulu b'dibura, you are blemishing your speech. With the Rambam is madgish gleich mit chilasein, as the Rambam emphasizes immediately in the beginning of the subject. When red v'nigoyim kumen mazir zayin fil Lashon Hara, when he discusses how plagues come to warn a person against Lashon Hara. So he goes from level, it starts with the house, it starts with the dishes, it starts with the clothing, it starts then the person itself, meaning there is a gradual reminder what just the speech itself, what it causes. When the Rambam and Neredvi Negoyim Kumen Mazir Zayin from Lashon Hara, when he discusses how the Negoyim come to warn about Lashon Hara, as b'shas mishtane oiroi v'yitz tarei, bleibt der Mensch, when his skin changes and he becomes nitztare, bleibt der Mensch muvdel u'mefursam levadui. So this is even before that he will become separated and publicized alone. He's not going to occupy himself any further in talking with the Rishoyim, and which is the scorning and mockery and Lashon Hara. So why does the Rambam add over here Litzonis and Sichas Rishoyim? This is all the definition of what Lashon Hara is. It's not just the Lashon Hara, but it is the speech. It's the blemishing of the speech. The L'chayre, Sichas Rishoyim and Litzonis Madachar Shmei, who talked about the talk of the evil or the scorning. We're talking about Lashon Hara. We have the Tzaras reminding of Lashon Hara. Nor der mit is the Rambam oisen zum Beweis sein. The Rambam is trying to explain here, as Lashon Hara welche bringt zu Negoyim, that Lashon Hara that brings Negoyim, not the prohibition of Lashon Hara, but what aspect of the Lashon Hara brings to the Negoyim is a prat, it's a detail on kumt mitzat sichas harishoyim bechlal. That's a detail that comes generally. This is just the evil talk in general. It's a deficiency in talk, not speaking, not the Lashon Hara, the intent. It's just the Sichas HaRishoyim. It's a lacking in the speech, which is the externality. Now, the inyan for the Goyim is kinal, because as we said before, the idea of this plague, as said before, as oir besoroi, the chitzonius ha'odom is nitki the boy. We're talking about that the externality of the person is not the way it should be. The emphasis here is there's something wrong with the speech. Something is wrong with his outside. The plagues are a rash on his skin. This is to point to the fact something wrong in the way he speaks, not an emotional, an evil, a bad intent, a damage, but a mere chisoron in speech. And what the Rambam prolongs the idea as Negoyim kommen zu Lashon Hara, that Negoyim come for Lashon Hara, wird abgelernt von Meitzah Miriam. that this is learned from the act of Miriam. And for this matter, the Torah warns his boinenu Miriam. Look what happened to Miriam. The Rambam is trying to tell you, Miriam wasn't punished for any bad intention, and she didn't do any damage, just for allowing her speech to speak Lashon Hara. That's what the Rambam wants to learn from the Maisa Miriam. That oynesh for the goyim of Lashon Hara. Why do we get plagued? The punishment of for Lashon Hara is not mitzad dem ersten inyan anal Lashon Hara. It's not because of the first aspect of Lashon Hara. Was eine midas roz eine masik dem zulas, that his bad characteristic traits do damage to the other one. Nor blois mitzad dem dibur atzme. It's just the dibur itself is what brings out the plague. Born by Miriam is the Chadra. By Miriam, you see, that's what we learned from Miriam. She raised them on her knees. She endangered herself to save him from drowning, from the ocean. From the water. So her speech was not with the intent to shame him. The Rambam says, she didn't even speak his elotosu, but she made a mistake. That what he did was wrong, but she didn't speak it. Moshe himself did not care about all what she said. So this is why we want to learn this from Miriam. There was nothing wrong. Is in ir dibur is nit given kishum rav hezek. In her speech, there was nothing bad or damaging. Nit mitzad Miriam or nit mitzad Moshe. Not from Miriam's perspective, she didn't intend bad, and not Moshe was hurt by it. It is a totally external matter that she spoke negatively. And yet she was punished with tzaras. So this points that the tzaras is associated with this speech, with blemishing the speech. That when I verstehen, basically we also understand was the Rambam bringt with chilas halacha now, that he brings in the beginning the halacha, them seder, how the negoim comes, la'aziram b'loshen hara, to warn them loshen hara. First, you see the way he touches externally until he gets closer to home. Mishtanis kidis beitzoy, first the homes, walls, nigi botim. The noch, and then if he still stands in his evil ways, Mishtanu Beitzoy. So then the leather vessels that are in his homes change. The moment if he still continues to stand in his evil ways, then his garments that are upon him change. And only later on, if he continues to stand in his evil ways, then his skin changes, and he becomes with the leprosy. But thus is masim to them now from Lashon Hara and Zayin Seder. This fits to the idea of above Lashon Hara and its Seder. B'shas man hebt on reden Lashon Hara, when you just begin speaking Lashon Hara, is that dibur an inyan chitzayin legamri. Speech is a totally external matter. V'charirt im nit on, it doesn't touch him. The far is like a nor der bais. That's why only the house was his in council abgeteilt from him, which is totally separated from him. Aber was mer redt, the more he speaks, als mer schleppt arein der dibur. So the speech itself drags him in even more. The Rav werd b'pnimiyusei, the evil goes down to his inner. Und der far kommen die negoyim in Sachen, and then the plagues come in such matters that are closer to him. What he uses, dishes, begod of his garments, to the extent that it touches the skin of his flesh. But this is still all external. When it actually enters inside, then there is no the whole Negoyim are not there anymore because the person is rotten on the inside, and therefore it won't have Negoyim at all. Pianal is move on, based on the above, it's understood by the beer from Alten Rebbe now, how the explanation of the Alter Rebbe mentioned before, as Negoyim kumen davke ba an Odom Hasholim, that these plagues come specifically by a person who is wholesome, was at Misakin given Kol Hadvorim, who fixed all of his matters with the exception of the end of his garments. Is nit nor nit kein stiris to the Ram. Not only does it not contradict the Adrabe, but in the contrary, they both come up in the same line. They go together. They work out perfectly. The Rambam's description of nega, that it comes because of dibur, fits with what the Alter Rebbe said. The person on Masholm, it's only externally. While these heroes from Lashon Hora was wird herausgebracht in Rambam, because being careful in Lashon Hora that it's brought by the Rambam is the zehirus in dibur mitzad atzmei. That's being careful in the speech by itself, which is external matter, not in the actual Lashon Hara, which is Kekei for Avodah Zarah and has all the serious matters of intentionally hurting or comes because of bad characteristic. That's a separate matter. And once we have that Lashon Hara, that's not sufficient, just the nega, then there would be a lot more. Rebbe explains now another matter. We also understand how come the correction, how do you clean this nega is dafke durch a kohen, can only be through a kohen. A kohen has to tell him that he's clean. Why would you need a kohen? If the person is only outwardly affected, but inside he's okay, why can't he do tshuva by himself? Seemingly, it's not understood. Since we're talking about a person who is an odom, he's a complete person. Kinal. Who has the power to sort out his inner matters. And he did it in actuality, he's an odom. Is vikumtes azer alein. How come that he himself cannot mevar sein the chitzoni sarashaboy? Why shouldn't he be able to sort out his external, the bad that he finds externally in that dibur, in that? Why can't he do it? He needs a kohen. Is the bir bazem? The answer to this, those of us on odom hasholim can nichshel better. Why could a person who is wholesome stumble in Lashon Hora and Lashon Hora, Alpha Pivos and Mevar, even though he already sorted out Kol Yonim B'nimim Shaboy, all the inner matters that is his, is Vales Ken Zayin Ara Hanelam. Because it's possible that there is a hidden Ra, Oimekara, it's called the depth of the Ra. Was his tif mushrish in the Odom, which is very deeply rooted in the person. It doesn't come out openly. It's hidden in his. The Rahanelam Drikzechois. How does that hidden evil express itself in the Dibur Odom, in the speech of the person? Ukenal, as mentioned earlier, as the Dibur is verbunden mit Netzem, mentioned that the speech is tied to the essence of the person. And such a speech, which seemingly is just an external matter, without any bad content, there in that speech, in that external speech, is which that hidden ra expressed itself. Because if the content is ra, is an odom hasholim, a person who is wholesome, the odom, who already sorted out the evil that was in the inside, he does not apply to him to go speak such words. And therefore, is the tikkun of Lashon Hora. So therefore, the correction for Lashon Hora by fixing that hidden ra that's in his soul. The river is as durch HaKoyin Davke. That's why it comes specifically to HaKoyin. Because is Chesed Ilah, the supreme level of Chesed. That's why he has the power to clean, to purify that hidden Ra. That's why we need the Koyin speech, the Dibur, emphasis. We're talking about Dibur. Tohirata, he has to say you. Through his Dibur, is a Mamshich an Eid Elyon B'Yoser. He brings down a very high level of light. This is Besakin the Mra Hanelam, which fixes the hidden Ra. Bees their Metzoyre Bertoyer Betachlis to the extent that the Metzoyre becomes totally clean. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Tazria Tovshin Mem Aleph.